tagging and tracking is only relevant for digital activities and cannot be used in any real life activities. That is absolutely not true, and I'm going to talk you through why that is. Hello and welcome to Engage and Thrive, also known as EAT, your coffee catch up with me, your host Taelon, where we will go through common problems and hurdles that come up in business, marketing and advertising and try and demystify them. I know firsthand how complicated and confusing it can seem with all the different acronyms and all the things to do in business. So let me try and help you be better in business. First things first, let's start with grabbing a coffee. Okay, so the first thing just to clarify in terms of real life activities, this is what you would typically call offline marketing. And a lot of people call it real life activities because it's what you can touch as opposed to sending a social media message. So offline activities and cover off radio, TV, billboards, print magazines, events, interviews, anything with physical touch, that's offline, or as people like to call it, real life activities. Now, the first thing to say why I think the statement is not true is, yes, it goes without saying it's a lot harder to track it than it is digital or online activities. However, don't you want to know? So there are ways, and I'll talk you through, I suppose, hacks and tricks about how you can try and track it, and then what that means in terms of for your reporting overall on your marketing and business activities. As always, let's start off with acronyms. So this one's going to have quite a few acronyms to go off, and a lot go more into the data side of it, which again we'll do way further down in other episodes. So the first one that is quite interesting is called a UTM, and this is a really strange name. It's Urchin Module Tracking. UTM. Yeah, I did get that right. I had to stop myself then. There is a UTM builder from Google, which I will link in the show notes. And basically what it does is you add on variables to your URL. Again, that's more the online side of things. Another one is ROI. So again, we cover this a lot of times, return on investment. Then you have GA, which is Google Analytics. You have CPA, so your cost per acquisition. You have QR, which again, I'll have to look up what actually QR stands for. But when we say QR, I mean a QR code. And then you have your cost per lead, so CPL. Getting tongue twisted slightly this morning. Okay, for this one, really, there is one key takeaway. And the one key takeaway is always try. So what I mean by this is wherever possible, put things on to try and track activity. Let's take it back to basics and old school. If you're doing any activity in real life, offline, or even online, you should have a way of tracking all your activity. So you used to be able to do it in Google Analytics and add notes. They've taken that away with GA4. And now personally, I actually add those notes to SEMrush, which again is another tool. But failing that, I always add in activity to a Google Calendar. So I use that in terms of tracking for marketing that's going forward and what's happening right now. So if for any reason I need to refer back to a date and say, what happened? I can always look in the Google Calendar. To give you a real life example, I was wearing a hoodie when I was flying back from London to Bangkok recently, and my hoodie had my website address URL on the sleeve. And when I got back to Bangkok, I was checking my analytics and I saw there was a huge spike in traffic for the beginning of the month. And I was thinking, gosh, I didn't do anything different in particular. I wonder what it was about. And honestly, it was from wearing my hoodie through the airports. And then when I saw the geographical locations that people were coming from, it absolutely must have been that people were looking at that URL and either searching there because there was an interchange at Doha that I did, or when they went back to their home countries. And it's crazy because even that, I didn't think I need to now add in a note to say wearing branded swag or wearing a URL. Okay, another way of tracking offline activity, like I mentioned earlier, is a QR code. So you would have seen them before, and they're probably less used, I suppose, in developed countries Western countries, but in Asia, it's very, very prominent to use a QR code because you also use it for payments. But with a QR code, essentially, it looks like just lots of blobbles and black and white, and you can put it in color, but essentially it's just a code that you scan. When you scan that code, then you can make it do anything. So you could make it go to a website, you could make it go to a social media profile, you could make it go to a links page with different variables. Again, I can show an example, and those are quite easy to make, and you can make those using different tools, or even Canva, you can actually make your own QR. One thing to note is when you've made a QR, you can't then change the destination URL, because that QR code is actually embedded in that like mishmash of black and white that you see. Okay, another way of doing things is by having a search term. So again, this goes back to old school. When I run a campaign at an agency in London, we had used a search term. So you might see on billboard and outdoor advertising where it says search for. And an example I can use as well is back in the day, there was one of the chicken nugget brands, Bird's Eye, and they said search for Bird's Eye. And so you would then sponsor that keyword under the online perspective of Bird's Eye chicken nuggets or whatever you want it to be, and it could be anything. You could sponsor the keyword flying pig, right, if that related to your campaign, and typically you'd want to pick a lower cost keyword. And then if you have that on your outdoor activity to say search that, if people have searched that particular keyword, they only could have seen it on that billboard or in that print magazine or whatever, so it directly comes from there. The other thing to think about is unique. So that's, I suppose, unique search terms and unique tracking. The other one is if you are going to an event, right, and you may have someone that has very, lots of interactions, with people. So if you are a CEO or a manager and you're meeting and greeting lots and lots of people, again, do you want your QR code? Do you want a unique tracking thing? Do you want a search term? Or do you even want to capture their data into your own Google form? Or scanning their business card and adding it in and tagging it? That's a way of showing that activity. With all of those, you have to bear in mind as well is the lead time from actually doing the search term or the offline activity, then how long it takes, and watching that correlation from it to actually know the conversion, which is why it's so important to have it marked out in a calendar or somewhere. And I'm saying this because honestly, a calendar is the easiest way of just adding in like, oh, we released a press release here, or oh, we had this event here. And then you can see then when the follow-ups happened, because it's just, it's nothing worse than having spent so much money on an offline activity is typically a lot more expensive than online activity. So spending all that money and then just not knowing what it did. So like, how would you know, if someone said to you, would you go to that event again? Or what was the return on investment for hosting that pop-up or doing that press release or a member of the team attending that podcast? It's really good to understand that, which kind of leads into a bonus tip around it is always associate a value with it. So by having the tagging and tracking, and when you want to obviously then do your funnel, you need to associate some cost from it, which the final key thing to discuss, and we can go into a lot further, is there will always be a debate around first click, last click. Okay. And understanding that, especially if I'm saying offline activity and talking about clicks, people will always say, is it that you spoke to me and so you understood about my brand and so that's what made you go and search? Or was it that you spoke to me, I then obviously data captured your information, and then I followed up with you on an email, and so that's then made you convert? Or you then saw an ad associated with my brand that then made you convert? Or you saw the brand and then you didn't do anything, and then further down the line someone as a referral spoke to you? So what do you count as the conversion, the first click or the last click, which interaction to that made someone convert? So that's just kind of to be very transparent that there will always be the debate about first click, last click. And unless we were all tagged in the real world for a full end-to-end experience, we're never going to know that. But the whole point, in summary, is yes, you can tag and track as such offline activity. At minimum, try. And that's my one thing for you to take away from today is always try and tag everything. So everything that you do for your brand, Just try and put some kind of tag or association on it and see what happens. But thank you for joining me for another week episode of Engage and Thrive with your host, Taelon, obviously my brand name, and see you next week.